What is the first popular music album? Your answer may vary depending on how broad the definition of album is. If the definition is simply a long-form collection of songs on a disc, then the first album could stretch back all the way to the late 19th century. In the more modern sense of the word, the first album could be Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Ballads or Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours. Both are great examples and milestone works in the field of popular music, but in my view, an album is not merely a collection of songs, but rather a larger piece of music made up of songs that join together to create a consistent whole. Albums in the decades leading up to the late 1950s were primarily made up of hits and album tracks, the A-sides and songs not even worthy enough to be B-sides. But it was in the mid-1960s where albums would become something bigger. No longer were albums divided between singles and lesser songs, but rather an equal collection of songs that create a greater whole. The first album to do this, in my judgment, is The Beatles' Rubber Soul. This is DES. Before we get into the album, let's discuss the popular music trends of the previous years. 1964 had brought about the British invasion, headlined by the Beatles and other British bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Yardbirds, the Who, and many others. The British rock sound became the predominant popular music of that year. The tone was more rebellious, the guitars were sharper, the drums were louder, and the voices were rougher. But in 1965, something unprecedented happened. The British invasion would be overtaken by a completely different sound. March 1965 would see the release of The Colossal Bringing It All Back Home by Bob Dylan. And just as the title suggested, popular music became headlined once again by American artists. The new sound was dubbed folk rock, with softer guitars, deep and layered poetry, and a more world-weary attitude. June of 1965 would see the release of Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds. This album would help solidify the new sound of folk rock, with beautiful harmonies, shimmering guitar accents, and the authentic poetry that made folk music so engrossing. These two albums would raise the standard of popular music, which meant that everyone else had to catch up, including the Beatles. They would release the album Help in August of 1965. While the album was received positively and has since become a staple of the Beatles' catalog, it began to show that the Beatles were a little behind the times. Songs like I've Just Seen a Face, Ticket to Ride, and the Titanic Yesterday showed the Beatles were blazing new trails for music. However, most of the rest of the material sounded highly similar to the previous albums they had made during the last phase of popular music. And so the Beatles would take influence from the folk rock movement on their next musical project. Due to the Beatles' contract with EMI, an album needed to be made in time for the Christmas season, so the sessions began on October 12th and concluded on November 15th of 1965. The sessions had only lasted 13 days, and this had been the first time the Beatles had an extended recording schedule without major interruptions like touring or filming. Due to this difference, they could focus all of their attention and efforts towards this work. The album dubbed Rubber Soul would be released on December 3rd, 1965 to incredible results. The album went to the top 5 on the charts around the world, sold over 1 million copies within a week, and received thunderous critical and fan acclaim. The album has since become one of the most iconic and influential rock albums ever released and showed that the Beatles weren't just a teeny bopper boy band, but in reality true musical visionaries that expanded what popular music could be. So without further ado, let's jump into side 1. Drive My Car opens with an enticing introduction, with each of the Beatles' instruments joining in one at a time. Then they launch into an incredible groove that was completely alien from anything the band had done previous. The song has a new level of sophistication and momentum that starts the album on a wonderful and unforgettable note. The musical style has significant influence from the American Motown R&B style that the Beatles had become infatuated with around this time. George was the most knowledgeable on this type of music, and he gave the song an American rhythm. The addition of tambourine and cowbell add more flavor to Ringo's solid drum beat. George plays a lead guitar riff and solo that perfectly suits the rhythm section, and Paul delivers a bass line that puts his previous ones to shame. Prior to Rubber Soul, Paul's bass lines ranged from mildly enjoyable to exceedingly simple, but due to primarily two factors, this changed. During the Beatles tour in 1965, they were exposed to new sounds that were being headlined by American artists. Paul found great inspiration in James Jamerson, a bassist who recorded for Motown. He had an incredible ability to perform melodic and creative bass lines, and Paul recognized this ability. As well as this, Paul switched from his standard hollow-bodied Hofner bass to a full-bodied Rickenbacker 4001. This new bass sound meant that Paul could emulate the amazing bass lines of Motown's records. Paul's bass line and George's lead guitar come together to create a driving rhythm for the song. Vocally, the song is delivered with 2- and 3-part harmonies from John, Paul, and George. The group's sound had already been marked with beautiful vocal harmonies, but their harmonies on this song are almost dissonant, which give the song complex musical layers. These harmonies will be present on every song on the album, and always add an immense amount to each. The lyrics of the song are sung from the perspective of a chauffeur who is offered a job by a woman who believes she is going to be a famous movie star. Paul explained later that the phrase "drive my car" is an old blues euphemism for sex, so there's certainly a shade of innuendo to the story being told. The chorus of the song ends with the irresistibly catchy "beep beep 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 yeah!" And as the song fades out, we move on to the next number. Norwegian Wood begins with a gentle acoustic guitar melody and is soon joined by a sitar played by George. This was the first time this Indian instrument was used on a Western pop record, and it gives the song a more surreal atmosphere. George also plays a 12-string guitar that gives the song a shimmering sound. This song being placed as the second track on the album immediately shows the listener that the album ahead will be full of experimentation and wonderful sounds. The lyrics written by John and Paul are sung from the perspective of a man who is having an extramarital affair that does not pan out. So in the morning, he sets fire to the woman's house and leaves. The lyrics show a change in writing that will be the thematic core of the album: love. Now, the Beatles had written about love for every song up until this point, but it was always simplistic. However, with Rubber Soul, the love portrayed is fraught with jealousy, unrequited feelings, regrets, arguments, desperation, but a higher sense of purpose. Their song's lyrics become far more matured and nuanced, and it began with this song. The lyrics were inspired by the writing style of Bob Dylan, and they're Dylan-esque in their ambiguity and darker content. Ever since hearing Dylan's Free Willin' album from 1963, the Beatles were heavily inspired by his musical sound and lyrical poetry. This can be seen in songs like I'm a Loser, It's Only Love, and You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. But the difference between these songs and Norwegian Wood is that this song was directly inspired by a song Dylan performed for the Beatles called Fourth Time Around. This song would not be released until 1966 on Dylan's Blonde on Blonde album, but the Beatles heard an early version of it long before then. Norwegian Wood was then written from the inspiration of that song. When Dylan released the song in 1966, its obvious similarities to Norwegian Wood were pointed out. Dylan responded that Fourth Time Around did not sound similar to Norwegian Wood, but rather Norwegian Wood sounded a lot similar to Fourth Time Around. Dylan had designed it as somewhat of a response to Norwegian Wood, doubling down on its darker lyrical themes and complicated acoustic guitar melody. He even parodied the Beatles' melodic singing style. The last verse of the song ensures that the message of the song is obvious to the individuals it was addressed to. I never asked for your crutch, so don't ask for mine. In Dylan's view, they were trying to adapt his style, but by that time the Beatles had taken more subtle inspiration rather than overt. But until then, the Dylan style would permeate their music and reach a peak on this album. As Norwegian Wood ends, we move into If You Won't See Me, You Won't See Me. You Won't See Me, musically, has a consistent momentum yet is slower paced than the opener. George delivers biting guitar accents, Paul plays an assertive piano melody, and Ringo contributes an excellent drum line. I'd like to point out Ringo's cymbal crashes. They produce such an exquisite sound that evokes the crash of waves. Paul delivers a beautiful and ingenious bass line that gives the song a steady rhythm. The lyrics written by Paul are from the perspective of a man having a one-sided conversation with his lover about her not being present in the relationship. This song begins a trend in Paul's writing that continues throughout the album, his conflict with then-girlfriend Jane Asher. This emotional change in Paul's life contributes to the more complex musings on love and relationships exhibited in this album. Paul sings the lead vocal on this song with a bitterness that had not been seen yet, and John and George's disinterested backing harmonies represent his girlfriend's deaf ears. This melancholic attitude continues with the next song. He's a real nowhere man. Nowhere Man opens with a transcendent three-part vocal harmony that continues the entire song. Ringo and Paul deliver another solid rhythm section, with Paul's bouncy bass part and Ringo's brilliant fills. George and John contribute twinkling guitar parts. The song is highly reminiscent of the Byrds sound, as are many songs on the album. The lyrics were written by John during a several-hour-long strike of writer's block. When he finally gave up, the entire song came to him, words and music. He describes a character referred to as Nowhere Man who lives in a liminal limbo-like state. The song's writing broke the trend that the Beatles had created from the beginning of the band. It was the first song of theirs to not be centered on the themes of love or relationships. The song is an anthem of a state of cosmic transit that everyone faces throughout life. The song is also the first Beatles writing to involve a literary character written about in the third person. This would be a format that would continue for the group's writing, but the perspective will switch back to first person with the next song. Think for Yourself immediately asserts itself with a fuzz bass played by Paul. The fuzz bass had been introduced to popular music with Marty Robbins' song Don't Worry, but first used in a rock song with Think for Yourself. John plays a Vox Continental organ, giving the song a subtle momentum, and Ringo's maracas, aggressive drum fills, and crashing cymbals give the song a confrontational rhythm. George's lead vocals and Paul's combative bass clash against each other, almost like a sonic argument. George wrote the lyrics, which yet again have a Dylan-esque edge and have been compared by contemporary critics to songs like Positively 4th Street and Like a Rolling Stone. George sings from the perspective of a man delivering a scathing message to end his relationship. There are withering attacks like the lines, "I left you far behind, the ruins of the life that you have in mind," and "Although your mind's opaque, try thinking more if just for your own sake." The lyrics are brilliantly negative and surreal, showing that George could now contend with the writing abilities of John and Paul. The Word quickly launches into an irresistibly catchy groove created by Ringo's top-notch drumming, George's attitude-riddled lead guitar, and Paul's phenomenal bass line. The end of the chorus is simply magnificent beyond explanation. Later in the song, producer George Martin plays the Bamberg harmonium, which was the first use of the instrument on a popular music record. Its sound adds a chaotic drone that adds a layer of excitement. While the instrumentation of the song presents itself in the key of D major, the vocal harmonies have a tinge of a minor key. This discrepancy gives the song a complex and sophisticated style. The lyrics written by John and Paul describe love as not just a feeling between two lovers, but rather a larger concept that transcends the material world. This type of transcendental writing would become the primary writing style of the nearing psychedelic age, as well as the ideology of the hippie movement. All of these musical pieces combine to create the trademark sound of psychedelic rock, which would become the predominant music form in the next 2 years. But following this groundbreaking track, we go back to something a little more old-fashioned. Michelle introduces a much different sound to the album with its French cabaret atmosphere. The three-part harmony vocals take center stage while a soft drumline, a subdued acoustic guitar, and a playful bass accompany. George plays a beautiful guitar solo around the middle of the song, playing the guitar in a way that makes it sound a bit like a bass. The solo was composed by George Martin, and he played piano with George Harrison during the recording, but out of range of the microphone. But the centerpiece of the song is Paul's extremely melodic lead vocal. Once hearing this song, it is almost impossible to forget the melody. Paul originally wrote the song in the late 1950s. Around that time, Paul had gone to a party with many art students where one of them sang a song with an acoustic guitar in French. Paul had created an imitation, and it became a common song for him to play at parties. It was suggested by John during the Rubber Soul sessions to rework it into a proper track. John would offer the bridge of the song to complete the writing. Paul asked a French teacher he knew to add some French lyrics to the song that go with Paul's English lyrics. The bilingual lyrics, as well as an elegant composition and atmosphere, create a mature and subdued end to side one of the record. Side 2 opens with the humble yet groovy What Goes On. The song was written by John, Paul, and Ringo, the only Beatles song credited to this combination. The song was originally written by John in 1959, and the band attempted to record it in 1963. It was revisited and finished during the Rubber Soul sessions. What Goes On is a song that is far more subtle in its execution of the Beatles' emergent musical abilities compared to others on the album. While songs like Nowhere Man and Norwegian Wood are outwardly impressive in their compositions, this song shows that their new musical abilities are not gimmicks, but here to stay. The musical stylings of the rest of the album are on full display, whether it be George's rockabilly-style guitar accents and solo, Paul's melodic and bouncy bass line, or the beautiful three-part harmonies throughout, with Ringo taking the lead vocal. The most interesting part of the song to me is Ringo's drumming. While it may seem simplistic when hearing it, playing it is a different story. There is an excellent video by The Art of Guitar that I'll link in the description explaining the difficulty of this drumline. But to summarize, it is a shuffle groove that is sustained for over 2.5 minutes with no mistakes or changes in speed. This drumline shows that Ringo could keep a beat like no other rock drummer, and have it so consistent that he was like a human metronome. And this song expertly demonstrates this uncanny ability. The song's lyrics continue the primary themes of the album, nuanced and complex love relationships. The narrator eulogizes his previous relationship in a one-way conversation with his ex-lover. The next song would carry this theme of melancholic love. Girl opens with just John's voice and a soft instrumental accompaniment. The song immediately presents an intimate mood, and it's enhanced by John inhaling during the chorus. The purpose behind this inhale has been debated by fans over the decades since the album's release. Some say it is to show the narrator's deep infatuation with the girl in question, some say it is to convey the weariness and desperation of the narrator, and some say that it represents the narrator toking, which was an activity that the Beatles immensely partook of during the Rubber Soul sessions. The musical style was meant to evoke Greek folk music. This was especially evident in the layering of John and George's acoustic guitars as well as George's 12-string. The intention was to make the lead guitar resemble a Greek instrument called a bouzouki. The bridge of the song even breaks down into somewhat of a German two-step. The unique and eclectic blend of musical styles gives the song an incredibly fascinating sound. In the chorus of the song, John's lead vocal is joined by Paul and George's harmonizing, creating an incredible sound. The lyrics of the song were written by John and describe a strange relationship with a woman who either intentionally or unintentionally acts as a self-oriented femme fatale. The lyrics capture a mix of emotions ranging from desperation to self-pity. It is one of the most melancholy love songs made by the Beatles. To continue with the theme of complex love songs, we move to the next song.
I'm looking through you. Where did you go?
I'm Looking Through You begins with a somewhat acoustic first verse with a steady percussive rhythm combining Ringo's drumming with a matchbox he is tapping. John plays a melodic acoustic rhythm guitar with George accenting with an electric lead guitar. Paul takes the lead vocal and delivers a fierce yet pained performance. The verse is then followed by a rapid-paced R&B section with a killer lead guitar riff, bright Hammond organ bursts, and a complementary tambourine. This juxtaposition gives the song a unique musical progression with complex and changing emotions. The chord progression reflects the moody and dissatisfied lyrics of the song. Paul's lyrics read as another one-sided conversation between two lovers where one is remarking on the other's distance and lack of presence. The imagery in the lyrics bring you into the headspace of the narrator with lines like, "Your lips are moving, I cannot hear. Your voice is soothing, but the words aren't clear."
In my life, I've loved them all.
In My Life opens with a truly iconic guitar riff. The rest of the instruments as well as the harmony vocals enter immediately, and what follows is one of the most complex, beautiful, and greatest melodies ever written. The chord progression gives the song a reflective quality, like we're walking through John's mind. Ringo's drumline and Paul's bass give the song a steady groove, while John and George's guitars perfectly accompany the vocals in a subdued fashion. The vocal harmonies are simply magical. They convey a tonal ambiguity that borders on melancholy but remains beautiful. During the bridge, George Martin performs a piano solo. John asked him to perform one and instructed him to have it sound Baroque. George Martin composed the solo with the inspiration from Bach and used the vari-speed technique. He played the solo at a slower tempo, then sped it up to keep time with the song. The technique gave his solo a unique timbre that made it sound like a harpsichord. This solo would help popularize the sound of Baroque piano and harpsichord that musical acts like the Kinks would delve further into. John and Paul wrote the lyrics and represent John musing on his life, from memories of nostalgic places to past loves, but it always comes back to telling the audience that he loves you more. John is ambiguous in telling about his life, but it reads like faint images of the past, as they would not be fully visible due to the march of time. The tone of the song, as with the vocal harmonies, conveys a tonal ambiguity that is never quite mournful, but never quite celebratory. The song in its totality is the embodiment of life. It is the complex mix of emotions, it's both in the past, present, and future, and at the end of the day, it's what we make of it. John called In My Life his first real major piece of work, due to its honesty. It was not about a made-up scenario, but rather his own life. And since its release, it has gone on to become one of the most revered songs by the Beatles and become a popular music standard. Wait picks up the pace immediately, beginning with a rhythm tambourine and lead guitar paired with a two-part harmony verse. A rocking drumline and maraca join in. Then the band launches into a high-energy chorus with a thunderous drum roll, cymbals, and tambourine. Then there's a rising action bridge that builds up anticipation and crashes back to the beginning. George uses a volume pedal for his guitar part that gives it a similar sound to previous songs like I Need You and Yes It Is. These two songs were recorded during the sessions for the previous album, Help. This song was initially recorded then, but left off of the album. But it was brought back and overdubbed to fit on Rubber Soul. The lyrics of the song, written by Paul, express excitement that the narrator is coming back home to his lover after a long time away. The song's rapid changes in momentum reflect an anxious yet excited energy that conveys the bustling and divergent emotions of the song.
If I needed someone.
If I Needed Someone begins with a shimmering guitar melody played by George on a Rickenbacker 12-string guitar. It is then joined by a spirited rhythm section. George wrote the song and sings lead with vocal accompaniment from John and Paul. The song also pivots to a moody bridge with a tambourine accompaniment. George wrote this song, and in it, the narrator tells his lover that if there was a time he needed someone, he would contact her. The lyrics do not convey a devotional or deep love relationship, but rather a casual and tentative one. It's another song to add nuance to the concept of love and show that there are many types of relationships that some call love. Even George's vocal delivery conveys this attitude. It sounds like he is disinterested in the affair at the moment. The instrumentation of the song, but especially the guitar riff, was inspired by a song from the Byrds' debut album called The Bells of Rimini. This was the most overt inspiration from that album on Rubber Soul, but the rest of the album is tinged with the sound pioneered on that debut.
You better run for your life if you can, little girl. Hide your...
And here, the album closes with a rocker, Run for Your Life. The song begins with a jangly rock and roll rhythm made with layered acoustic, electric, 12-string, and slide guitars. The rhythm is filled out by a steady drum beat, tambourine, and a bouncy bass line. John sings lead and is backed up by Paul and George. The song has a similar presence to other folk rock songs like Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. The lyrics written by John were initially based off of a song recorded by Elvis Presley called Baby Let's Play House. The song included the lyrics, "I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man." The rest of the lyrics are a dark threat to the narrator's girlfriend if she is ever seen with someone else. The lyrics bring to mind classic country and folk murder ballads made popular by artists like Johnny Cash, but Run for Your Life turns the concept into a rock and roll number. The album exhibits the theme of nuanced and strange love relationships throughout, and it seems like a brutally ironic decision to end an album with these themes in such a crazed and cynical way. It's almost as if the same character experienced all of these failed relationships and went crazy in the end. Retrospectively, John called this song the worst Beatles song, while George called it one of his favorites on Rubber Soul. This split in reactions to the song has remained until the present day, but I believe it enhances the complex emotional experience the album puts forward. In an album where emotions are never fully explained or settled on, it makes sense to have the most confounding song on the album be the ender. I believe it serves as a wonderfully offbeat way to bring the album to a close. When George Harrison was asked about his favorite Beatles album, he responded with this: "Rubber Soul was my favorite album. Even at that time, I think that it was the best one we made. The most important thing about it was that we were suddenly hearing sounds we weren't able to hear before. Also, we were being more influenced by other people's music and everything was blossoming at that time, including us. This album was the ultimate turning point for the Beatles as artists, and set in stone their trademark style of musical experimentation and exploration. And going forward, the band would only continue to get more musically progressive as each album was made. But it was with Rubber Soul that the album became the supreme form of popular music expression through its ingenuity, genius melodies, variety, and cohesive intent. Rubber Soul was the first album to present a new growing Beatles to the world. For the first time, we began to think of albums as art on their own, as complete entities." George Martin.
Say the word and you'll be free. Say the word and be like me. Say the word I'm thinking of. Have you heard the word is love? It's so fine, it's sunshine. It's the word love. I misunderstood, but now I've got it. Spread the word and you'll be free. Spread the word and be like me. Spread the word I'm thinking of. Have you heard the word is love? It's so fine, it's sunshine. It's the word love. Everywhere I go, I hear it. In the good and the bad, say the word and you'll be free. Say the word and be like me. Say the word I'm thinking of. Have you heard the word is love? It's so fine, it's sunshine. It's the word love. Now that I know what I feel, you're right. I'm here to show everybody tonight. Give the word a chance to say that the word is just a way. It's Oh,